game developer, this is a problem that you have to solve, especially if you are starting out on a project and you don't have a lot of content to begin with. So you have to kind of decide how much time you want to invest on getting content to look good versus actually, making your game. And what I'm hoping is that you guys can leverage a tool like ArtEngine in order to ramp up your textures and your material database in order to get high quality looking textures that you can use from the start of your project, but also carry it on through to production using enhancement methods to modify your existing textures to cut down on throwaway work. Now, having said that, I think the best thing to do is just kind of jump into ArtEngine. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen. And if it doesn't work, blame Larry.
That was my plan.
Oh, wait, I don't want to share. I want to share a window. OK, here we go. Cool. So hopefully.
It's loading. There it is. Yep, we got it.
Awesome. So ta-da, this is ArtEngine. And for those of you who are familiar with applications like Substance Designer or Houdini, or have used our tools like Shader Graph, this should look familiar. But just in case, I kind of want to give a high-level walkthrough of the UI, just get a lay of the land. So when I'm like spastically moving my mouse around, you'll kind of know like what I'm thinking based off of where I am in the app. So the way that I like to split up the UI is into 3 sections. So like left, middle, and right, basically. So the left side, hopefully you can see with this sort of dark skin, this is our asset library. And I can import things like JPEGs or PNGs by right-clicking, choosing to import, and bring in any kind of textures that I want on my hard drive. Below that, you can see kind of a little bit of sneak peek into some of the nodes that are available to you at your disposal in ArtEngine. And a lot of them are things that are very familiar, so they're image processing. But then there's a lot of cool ones that are specific to ArtEngine, so the smart mutations and the remaster. And then on the right-hand side of the app is our settings and our properties menu. So anything that is related to how the parameters you want to set for a particular node, you'll find here. And then all the magic happens in the center, which is your workspace. So you can do things like drag from your assets, textures that you've just imported. You can move it into this graph workspace. You can grab a node from the library. Let's do something like brightness contrast, bring it into the workspace. And ArtEngine will attempt to connect it in a smart way based off of like what nodes you bring in and what nodes exist. If you want to move things around or disconnect, you can do something as simple as right-click and then reconnect as you see fit just by clicking and dragging. So this should be like familiar workflow if you're working in an editor, a node-based editor. And then if you double-click on a node, you'll see at the top we have our previewers. So there's a 2D previewer where you can see the flat texture itself, and a 3D previewer where you can see kind of how it would look on a 3D object in sort of a lighting environment. And you can do sort of like little setups here and tweak the preview. So you can bring in an environment map, or you can change out the mesh that you see here to something that's preset. Or you could bring in one of your custom models if you just want to test out a material on something that you know is going to go into your game. Cool. And then, I wanted to just take a moment to mention, again, with these smart nodes, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, the reason why they're called smart and what makes ArtEngine kind of stand out from other sort of procedural-based tools is that it's not just procedural. So it doesn't just take preset rules and algorithms. It actually combines aspects of like a trained machine learning in order to take data, so the stuff that you're importing into ArtEngine, and learn from that and process that data on an individual basis. So in that sense, it's what we call an example-based workflow. Okay, so now that we have that, let's take a look at an example graph. So I'm going to open up a project that I already have created. So we won't save this.
Now, it's just sharing the window. Okay, no, it did work. All right, cool. I wasn't sure if it would show the new one, but it has.
If there's any type of snafu in the tech, please let me know, because
So we
I
can
will
adequately blame Larry?
Yeah, or unless you want me to ramble a bit and then be embarrassed later.
Mike, I know my role in this. There's usually a slight pause between the time that you open something up on your desktop and the time it displays on the machine. So just be aware of that. That's just the quality of the internet.
Oh, for sure.
Oh yeah, especially in my area, I think somebody's stealing my bandwidth. I can't be certain, but I'm pretty sure it's my neighbor. Okay, so hopefully, let me see if I can give myself some more real estate space. You can see the text on these nodes. But here's an example of something that I did on the fly. So I have some furniture in my apartment that's really ugly, and I want to bring that into a 3D environment. So I have this like ottoman in my living room, and I wanted to make a texture out of the upholstery of that furniture. So I just took something as low tech as my Android phone. I took a picture of it and brought it into ArtEngine and added it to this node, and you can see of course, it's from the top down. So there's a distortion in the checker pattern from the top to the bottom. There's a little bit of like light unevenness because, I have vertical blinds. So there's a little bit of sunshine coming in. So you can see there's a little bit of like light at the top, but not at the bottom. And obviously it's not tileable. So it's not a seamless texture. And basically, this is what I have to work with.
I think your furniture looks really nice. I think you're just being too judgmental.
Oh, thank you. Courtesy of IKEA. So,
there you go.
Well, this is probably the starting point of a lot of people who just want to grab stuff from Google search. And this is something that ArtEngine does really well. It's enabling you to take content that may not be appropriate or may need a lot of fixing up and process it so that it can be used in a variety of different resolutions, different types of materials. So in this particular example, I'm going to first want to get rid of this distortion that's happening in my checkerboard pattern. So we have the ability to do some transformations. And one such node is this distort node. And I can double click on the node, and you'll see that it will update the particular state of that node in both the 2D and the 3D viewer. And then here, I'm in sort of the edit mode of the distort. And I can go to this dropdown, and you can see for this particular node, the different states. So you can take a look at the input, and this will show you what it looked like before it entered the node. And then the output will show you the effects of the transformation. And the last state is sort of like what I call this intermediate edit mode. And this is kind of a pattern that you'll see in all the other nodes going down the graph. So then what I did was just do a simple crop because, again, this is something that's example based. And I want to be able to feed my smart nodes coming down the network the cleanest data possible. So I want to just make sure that I process everything really well, just to make the actual AI run as smooth as possible. And this brings us to the first example of our smart nodes, which is this pattern unwarp. And what this will do is it will get out any sort of distortions that are in what it finds as a pattern within the image. And right now, you'll see kind of the product of how that node processed. If I go back to the input, you'll see this is what it looked like before. And the cool thing about the unwarp is that, again, it's taking data that I'm feeding into this node. So namely, I'm taking a patch. There's a few different sort of routes that you can use this node with in order to get the best results possible. But for this particular example, I'm using sort of like this patch detection where I pick out an area of that's the smallest repeatable pattern, and it'll use that as a sample to check against the rest of the image and try to get out as much kinks as possible. Okay. And then I just want to, again, make sure that everything is as clean and as kind of make the data as clean as possible. So I just have a simple sharpen node. And notice that, like I mentioned earlier, when you select a node, you can see the properties for that node appear on the right-hand side. So I'm just going to try to make this a little bigger. So, you know, for particularly the sharpen node, you can see that I can affect the strength of it, and it'll update it inside of the 2D previewer and the 3D in real time. And then we have something to help sort of clean up any artifacts inside the pattern. For this particular example, there wasn't that many, but I just threw it on just because I like to make things as clean as possible. And it's running through the network, so it's not costing me anything. So it's not something that I have to do manually. And then this actually brings us to some really cool nodes, which are mutation nodes. And for this particular example, because we have a repeating pattern within our image, I'm going to use what's known as the mutation structure node. And basically, this is something that will resize my image or expand out a repeating pattern to a pretty high texture resolution. And if I select on the node, you can see in the properties setting over here, I can expand this out to something like an 8K texture, and then everything beneath that. But not only does it expand it, but it will make this a tileable, seamless texture in the process. And when I double click on this, you'll see that is now a 4K texture. It has expanded out the pattern, the repeated pattern. And if I go back to the input, you can just see the difference. Okay, and at any point in time, if you want to preview the state of your graph, you can right-click and choose to execute the node up to that point. So you can either do it in this right-click menu, or there's a set of controls at the top of this sort of graph workspace here that lets you run the whole graph or run just a section of the graph. And then what I want to do is, from this texture that I now have created and mutated, I want to be able to create a series of maps that I can then hook into my PBR material. And this is something that ArtEngine does really well because, one, you can generate a ton of different maps. If I go to this compose material and check out this dropdown, you can see it does everything from like normal, albedo, bump, height, ambient occlusion. So you can have it all. But it also lets you process all of the sort of the smart mutations, all of the image processing in sort of like a combined data stream. So for instance, like here I have this split material node, but kind of conversely, and if I press spacebar, I can bring up a node, sort of quick search, and I have something called a compose node. So this will do the opposite, where it will gather up all of the different maps that I'm making into a single node, and then I can feed that into something like my mutation structure, and that'll process all of the edits that I'm making or all the transformations I'm making on a single like data stream, and then split it out so that I can output it to whatever maps that I need. And then last but not least, I have an ability to create an output and give it some naming properties and then some export properties. So I can tell it like where to export out to. If I open up my advanced menu, I can choose, this is taking a second because it's running through any of unprocessed nodes. Okay, you can see the little icon spinning here to indicate that it's just running through the graph.
Yeah, behind the scenes, it's doing a lot of pre-calculations and determinations so that when it has to think about some form of mutation or something, that it can happen faster. But when you run them all, then it can take a moment there.
Okay, I do. So that was I do want to bring up that there are sort of requirements that you need to check against for your graphics card. So I just happen to have a card that's kind of on the low end, just due to working from home. So it's not running as smoothly as I would like, but that's just due to hardware requirements. Okay, so here is the advanced export window. And for me, who has done a lot of sort of automated workflows, I really want the ability to have like an automated naming convention when I export out my maps. So being able to use this export structure to predefine like how these textures are going to be named when they get outputted or output is really important to me. And actually a new addition to ArtEngine, which I'm really excited about, is our batch output nodes. So this is something that just got recently added. So we have a batch output and a batch input. Oh, did I not? Oh.
Looks like it's just taking a second there.
I get a little fidgety with my computer.
Are you about to use the batch input, or are you just trying to show the node?
I just wanted to show the node.
Oh, fair enough.
Oh, okay. So here it is. So basically, instead of inputting a specific texture, you can run this over a folder that has all of your maps dumped into it, and it'll process all of your textures in one go, and you can let it run overnight. And as long as you hook it up to a batch output, because these guys work in tandem, it'll process all of your stuff kind of in an automated way. So it's really good for working with large image sets. Cool. So that's kind of like how you would work within ArtEngine. And this is by no means like the only set of nodes. This is something that like you just kind of have to play around with. And it's actually really fun hooking up the different nodes and testing out the different ways to optimize things and to get things processed as fast and as good looking as possible. But how do you use this in an actual practical workflow? So like, where does this go once you're done with your texture, and how can you incorporate it into like an existing art pipeline? So for that, I kind of want to move into the editor, actually the Unity editor, and give a little bit of a mini window into like how I would use ArtEngine to do my texturing. So
now, while you're doing that, go ahead.
I was going to say, I am not, texturing was not my primary role as a game dev. As an animator, but I have been asked to do that as a generalist role. So do not judge my texturing skills.
Fair enough. I will say, while you're transitioning over to Unity, so the workflow here, and really we're going to be covering a lot of artist tools, but the workflow here with ArtEngine that you just saw is a very standard, foundational, sort of robust workflow where you take a picture with your phone or whatever, something that traditionally with photometry would take, a lot of equipment and setup and whatever, do a ton of cleanup, and you end have something like really, really cool and really, really compelling, and that's a great solid thing. It's not the most fun, to like every day, like, yes, but this is the bread and butter of the work people need to do. But some of the stuff, and there's tons of videos and stuff online and everything, and we could talk about it, whatever. Some of the other stuff that we can do with this software, right? Some of like the color matching and the mutators and stuff like that really allow you to take input materials and turn them into all sorts of wacky and wild things. I was having fun the other day. I was presenting this, and I had wood grain, and I was just dropping people's profile pictures in and saying, "Hey, ArtEngine, match the wood grain to this person's face," and it would take the colors from the profile picture and apply it to the woods. And I could say, well, this person is a bleached sandalwood, and this person is a pressure-treated pine. And so Frodo Baggins, by the way, from Lord of the Rings, perfect pressure-treated pine color palette.
It's such a nerd.
Right. Well, of course, it's a nerd thing. Here we are. It's the century of the nerd. But the idea is that like you could just drop whatever in and just get all these variations, all these. It's just really, really powerful. It's really, really cool. And some of the stuff, Andrea, have you seen any of like the experimental stuff? We're not allowed to talk about, but have you seen any of it?
Possibly.
Okay.
The thing that you're talking about, the thing.
No, okay. Because there's some stuff I saw like this weekend that was just like, holy crap. So anyway, I mean, there's some really cool stuff you can do with this software. But you know, so just kind of wanted to mention that, right? There's these sort of bread and butter, gonna make your life a billion times easier things, but there's also a lot of really cool possibilities and potentials and workflows that can be done with it.
Yeah. So to Mike's point, like I kind of just want to show sort of that baseline workflow, and then there's so many nodes that we don't have time to get into, but they can do a lot of crazy outlier things, and definitely, you know, test them out. And I found some really weird ways to input into you know, different things that you wouldn't have imagined. So it's just kind of, if you're used to working with node-based editors, you kind of know like a lot of it is experimentation. So ArtEngine is kind of very similar in that way.
Totally.
All right, so here is.
And you're still sharing the ArtEngine window?
God damn it. All right.
I was giving you the benefit of the doubt.
Thank you. I appreciate you catching me before I got too far.
While you're doing that, true story, Mike, back in the days of overhead projectors, all I had to do was with one hand put the plastic transparency on the projector, and the other hand turn over the piece of paper. I screwed up and put the piece of paper on the overhead projector. The screen behind me went to a solid black, and I began the presentation by saying, "As you can see."
Great.
I didn't understand why everybody laughed.
It's inevitable.
Andrea, the floor is yours again.
No worries. Is that the overhead projector, the one where the teacher would have the markers, the erasable markers that they would write while you would give the...
Yes, and you've just made me feel even incredibly older than usual, but yes.
No, sorry.
Once upon a time, there were overhead projectors.
Okay, well, to save myself, let's go back to Unity. So this is Boat Attack, which some of you may have seen this out in the wild because it is available to the public, but it's our internally made project that is meant to showcase our new render features. So our scriptable render pipeline, specifically in this case, it's called the universal render pipeline. And there's a lot of cool, really cool graphics features that are connected with this. There's one that we're going to really get into, which is shader graph. And Mike will talk a little bit about post-processing and camera work, but there's definitely a lot of tools, artist tools to experiment with our render pipelines. But what I wanted to call your attention to is in this little cove over here, this little quiet, tranquil beach spot, we have our first boat. And as you can imagine, for a project called Boat Attack, there has to be, you know, some boats that are riding around and attacking. And in the spirit of that, one of our Unity content creators has tried to head mount cannons, water cannons, onto this boat here. And because not everyone loves cannons, we weren't quite sure how much time and effort to put into this. So as you can see, it's a really quick, early, you know, prototype mesh. So nothing really special. And the same thing with material, just something to slap on so that we could test out this feature. But I kind of want to demonstrate like how to take what's there, an existing texture, and just guss it up a little bit with ArtEngine. So the first thing I want to show you is just what the texture looks like. And I have it here in Photoshop. So it's just kind of like a flat color, but it has these Unity logos on it. So it's an unwrapped model. And I really wanted to keep the Unity logos because of Unity. And so I brought this into ArtEngine. Here we go. And you can see I already connected it up to this graph here. And I just want to point out that it's a 4K texture, but I wanted to add something on top, like layer a texture, give it a little bit more detail. So because I'm lazy, again, I just scoured the internet and looked for free metal texture. And I found this, which is kind of like this gunked up, dirty metal sheet with some discoloration and some like lighting unevenness in the top right corner. So I want to use this to layer on top of my 4K texture. Also keep in mind that the native resolution for this guy is a 640 by 480. So I'm going to have to deal with that later on down the line. So the first thing I want to do is just grab a sample of this texture that I can use to feed, well, first to process and then to feed into one of my mutation nodes. So I have a crop that I've made. I just grabbed something that had some like interesting detail in it that I want to use. And I have this gradient removal tool, and I'm double clicking on it to show it in the previewers. But basically, this is a way that I can stamp out any outlier pixels to give me a more even color map. And then to just sort of hit home a little bit, I've added this albedo generation node, because as part of the texture generation or the map generation, it has this sort of de-light function capability to even more even out and flatten out any like highs and lows on the color. However, as a process, because of that, it sort of took away some of the extra details from the original texture. So what I've done is just taken a blend node and took the original texture with the gradient removal, use it as my background to this blend node, and then took that delit texture and layered it on top in overlay mode, just to kind of mute it down, but not too much. And this is something you can play with the opacity. So like right now, I just want to get it hooked up and test it out. And I can always go back into my graph because it's non-destructive and test out the different settings until I feel or see something that I like. So after that, I feed it into a levels node, and I'm just, again, adjusting the highs and lows of the different colors and the different sort of like lighting strengths. And then here is where we get introduced to another one of our smart nodes, which is our seam removal. So if we look at what's coming off of the levels and getting fed into our seam removal, I'm going to show you the input. So when I double click on this guy, or actually we'll do levels, you'll see that it's obviously not seamless, and I can't use this as a tileable texture. So what I'm going to do is feed it into the seam removal. And if I go to my edit node here, what I'm allowed to do is interact with these handles to choose like what data I want to feed into this node, including the adjacent data to this sort of like cropped or this like border area. And that's what the seam removal node will use in order to like teach in order to spit out a more optimized and better looking seam on the edges of this texture. Okay. And then after that's run, it's now a seamless tileable texture. However, there's some areas that are definitely popping out that I need to hammer down. And there's a bunch of different ways and nodes that are available for you to do some further cleanup after you've run it through a seam removal or a mutation. Because I'm overlaying this on top of another texture and I want to do some hand painting on this later, I'm not going to worry about that right now, but that's something I can always go back and revisit and change some settings. But what I do want to do is up-res this so it matches my 4K. So I want to increase the tile a little bit so that tile sample is not too small. When it repeats, it's not like too obvious. So I'm going to use this up-res node, and I can do something up to 2 or 4, or I can choose between whether I want to use a model for more stylistic textures or a model that's more for photoreal, and then up-res this up to 4 times, and then I can do that again if I need to. But basically, I've up-resed my 400 by 400 texture to a 16 K or 1600 by 1600. And then I'm going to feed it into a mutation node, which is very similar to that structured mutation that we saw earlier. But this is just going to take the existing sample instead of trying to find an internal repeating pattern. It will just use the pattern, the whole image there, to expand out that texture in a seamless way, and increase it to a 4K texture. So having done that, I'm just gonna use another blend node to blend that on top of that existing base texture so that I can have some more detail, but keep that Unity logo in there. And I'm using an overlay with like a slightly adjusted opacity and just outputting that to where my textures, my raw textures are that I'm bringing into Photoshop through my output node. Okay, and what I get is this. So this is something that came out of ArtEngine. So I came directly from that output node. I brought it into Photoshop, and I just want to do even more details on this because this is an unwrapped item and it may be something like a hero prop. So I want to make sure that I have this set up to be able to add more details to it. So I added kind of this like painted metal layer that I then masked out some places where there's like stress on the hard edges of that gun that we saw. And then I have like an adjustment layer to just brighten up some of that like metal that's exposed underneath. And then just went through my normal export process that you would do to get your textures out of Photoshop into Unity. So let's go back to the gun that we saw in Unity. And I'm going to one second, my computer is playing catch up. Oh no.
You can do it, computer.
Here, let me shut down Photoshop because I think we don't need it now. All right, I may have to take the nuclear route and then shut down this.
Do you want me to share real quick while you're doing that, or?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay.
Are
you just shutting down Unity or shutting down your computer?
Oh, shutting down Unity.
Oh, okay. Well, let's see if it pops back up then. I was gonna say, how many Chrome tabs do you have open?
I'm super strict on Chrome tabs. I can't have more than like 4. I'm the type of person that like will go over a friend's house and start organizing the back of their entertainment unit because I can't stand all of the different plugs in all the different outlets.
I'm sure you're great at parties.
I'm super fun.
My daughter says that I'm CDO. That's like OCD, only I felt compelled to arrange the letters in their proper alphabetical order.
Oh my God, we are kindred spirits, Larry. Okay, we're back again. Okay, so I just wanted to apply the material to the gun and show you guys just the difference. And this is something that I just painted on, and it took maybe all of 10 minutes. Okay. So it's kind of a simple workflow example, but you can imagine, if you have your graphs already set up, this is something that you can expand out to other, especially with the batch nodes, you can expand out to the rest of your art team, and process a bunch of textures all in one graph in different ways. But that if I had a texture and a mesh that was unwrapped and I needed to do some manual custom fiddling with it, I can still use ArtEngine in my workflow in that capacity. Cool. So that is kind of one aspect of artist tooling and sort of that iteration cycle incorporating Unity. But another aspect is 3D meshes. So we've dealt with maps and textures. So if I wanted to have that sort of same iterative process, but with a 3D mesh that's already brought into Unity, how can I use Unity's tools in order to help me as a 3D modeler get into this iterative process so that I can have a workflow that's easy and quick without interrupting engineering work. So here, as an example, go back to the boat. If I select the boat and I look at the setup in the hierarchy, you'll see that this is a prefab. And the prefab already has a bunch of stuff on it. So it's got like stuff for physics, it's got some scripts to control the boat, and it's stuff that like maybe I as an artist have not set up. However, if I want to change out this boat mesh and bring in a new one, then I would break the link to all of the work that the engineers have already set up. And I would have to have them redo it, or myself, I would have to redo it again. So I need a way in order to link this, or a way that I can change out the art underneath without disrupting any work that was already done inside of Unity. And we actually have a solution for that, and it's called our FBX exporter. I'm going to run through this fairly quickly just because I want to make sure that we get everything in. So I'll show you where the exporter is. So it's in our package manager. And right now, it's already installed inside of, interesting.
What did you do? Is your computer's overheating?
Yeah, okay. I'm going to see how far I can get.
We don't need words.
So, okay, there we go. When in doubt, just restart or kick your computer. So we have the FBX exporter, and it's already installed in the project. So if it wasn't, you would just install it here instead of updating. But basically, this is a tool that's going to enable you to have a link to whatever modeling package that you're of your choice. So if it's Max or Maya or Blender, and then you can link that up to Unity so that you have this sort of live link and pass meshes back and forth. There's one other piece of setup that you need to do, and that's in the project settings. So if you select on FBX exporter, so this will now be a new option after the installation. And one thing that's important is choosing the 3D application. So if you have a bunch of things installed, Unity will do its best to try to find that install folder and list it here in the dropdown. So for animation, I use Maya. For modeling, I'll use Max. So I'm going to select Max here. And basically what this does is it'll generate a bunch of plugins that you can either output directly to the plugin folder, or you can output it to somewhere on your hard drive and like drag it into whatever your plugin folder is for your 3D application. So I've chosen Max, and I've actually already done this. So I've dragged the files that Unity has created into my Max installation folder, and that should be it. So once that is set up, then you should have the ability to have Max and Unity speak with each other. So now the only thing left to do is link our mesh to, or our FBX import to the prefab that was wrapping around it. And we're just going to do that to the boat in the scene. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a little shortcut to select all children. And that way, whatever work engineering has done to this object, to this prefab, I want to make sure that I capture all of that. So I'm going to select the entire hierarchy and right click and choose to convert to FBX linked prefab. And when I do that, it'll bring up this menu here and it'll ask me to do some settings. So I'm going to rename this just so that it's easy for me to find later. And I always put my name in it, or something like do not touch, or incredibly important, just so everybody knows it's mine. And then all I need to do is choose where I want it to export to inside the project and hit convert. And then it'll just give me a warning saying that it may rename some of the hierarchy if I click through. It'll take a minute or two just to do the processing. You'll know that it's working when the menu clears out, and then you'll see that we'll have a new prefab and a new FBX that we can then use in either Max or Maya. Okay, there we go. I was going to...
Yeah, it takes a moment the first time. It makes you really nervous.
Yeah. So if I search for Andrea, you can see that I have my FBX and then I have my prefab, and they're now linked together. So the way to best demonstrate that is actually to just bring this into Max really quick. So I'm going to switch over to Max, and you'll notice that there's a new Unity option on the top toolbar. For Maya, you'll see it in the file menu. But when I select it, I should have the option to import an FBX. And then I just need to point it to that new model or the new FBX that just got created. So I'm going to drill down into my project and grab boat Andrea. And it'll give me a warning about units. So I'm going to let the plugin do its magic and convert to the max units, or from Unity to Max. And
hey, Andrea, real quick, there's a question here in chat about which 3D software is supported by these FBX workflows.
So I know for a fact Max, Maya, and I want to say Blender, but outside of that, I'm not sure. We'll have to get back to you on that.
Cool.
Okay, and this also just takes a minute or two. Okay, I'm going to shut down ArtEngine just because I think... All right, I know this. I know this sign from Max is not happy. Okay, I guess I will restart. While we restart, is there any questions you guys have so far?
Fair enough.
Okay.
So we're gonna be showing what the model being transitioned into Max, and then or Autodesk 3ds to Max.
Yeah, I think I'll just show that, and we may have to skip out on the shader graph stuff, unfortunately, unless
I can show it real quick too, or whatever. Yeah, what time do we have here, or how late are we allowed to keep you guys?
You've got over an hour.
Oh.
Oh,
okay.
wow.
What?
Oh, well, okay then. Strap in, boys and girls.
We did have another question in chat though, from David.
Oh, okay. What is the advantage again of the FBX linked prefab over normal FBX? Well, I'm glad you asked, David, from Encino, California. I have no idea where you live. So basically, if we let's say we have brought in an FBX model and we're working on, so FBXs will have some form of hierarchy in Unity. So we're adding scripts and we're adding, you know, structural changes and stuff like that. And then we want to continue working on that. If we simply, you know, export it as an FBX, it's going to be an FBX, you know, and we're going to be able to do some edits on it and stuff. And when we bring it back in, it will be a different FBX file, which means, you know, hierarchical changes will be lost. All of our original work will be lost if we just swap it out. Assuming we set up our prefabs originally in such a way that's less of a problem, but there's still room for error there. Now, if we export it as a linked prefab, what you're going to see, and you'll actually see this here on the screen, is that the hierarchy that the prefab had in Unity is maintained here in 3D Studio Max. And so that any edits here, when you bring them back in Unity, will maintain that structural change because it's the same prefab and you don't lose any work, which is really useful if you're working on a team with a bunch of people and you don't want people overriding your work.
Just what he said.
Sweet. I was right.
So also what Mike mentioned, you'll see in the Scene Explorer, this is the hierarchy that is exactly what we saw in Unity. So it's all intact, with the exception of this Max native like export set. So this is kind of like your manifest for all of your meshes in the scene. And whatever you add to this prefab, you have to add to this export set. And it's the same goes for Maya. So Maya will have its own native with groups or sets. I believe it's sets as well. So you'll see kind of what I mean in just a second, because I'm going to just show you that what I do inside of Max will get reflected in Unity. And I'm just going to create sort of this like box behind.
So you're an artist like me.
Yeah. Oh man, my art credentials are going to be revoked.
I believe that's referred to as cubism, right? Isn't that that's
minimalism. So I'm going to go ahead and I could throw the teapot on the boat just to complete, the cliche. But anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and just add this box to wherever the boat is in the hierarchy, just to make it clean. And then the last thing, like I mentioned, you need to make sure that you add this to the FBX export set. So in Max, you can open up that set editor and just make sure that you have the box selected and add it here. And then the last thing you need to do is just export. So that should be it. And ta-da, now there's some junk in the trunk on the boat. Cool. So the last thing that, or actually now that we have time, there's two more things I wanted to show you guys. And then I'll pass it over to Mike. So the next thing that I want to do is sort of, show you that you can replace this entire mesh if you wanted to. Like, just say this was something that was a prototype and you blocked it out super fast, but now you have your 3D modelers and they've actually done some really cool boat work or really cool hard surface modeling, and you want to bring it in instead of this particular boat. But Mike and I were talking and we were discussing about how, even though this is boat attack, we kind of feel like you could probably race a lot of other stuff in boat attack that would be interesting. And for me, I'm a creature of comfort. So I think instead of racing on a boat, I would like to race on something more comfortable, like a bed. I would like to race a bed. But I was like, that may not be really appropriate for a racing game. So I figured something that maybe a good compromise would be a couch. And Mike agreed. So,
you know what? But now that you said racing a bed, I'm like, we really should have gone racing our bed. How did we not see that? How did we not do that?
I know. I thought about it because I was watching some videos of like people talking about how to combine a bed with like other vehicles, and I was like, that's brilliant. But we'll just go with a couch because that's equally as good. Maybe not. So anyway, we can go back into 3ds Max, and I have my box here, which I'm gonna get rid of. I'm just gonna keep my boat in for reference. So I so happen to have a couch that I'm gonna merge in. So
I like how you play that off like you just so happen to have a couch.
in my back pocket.
Oh, this old thing?
Okay, so here's my couch, and you'll notice that it's itty bitty because I just need to adjust the scale to fit the boat. So I'm just gonna put on my, okay, book, here we go. Just gonna put on Xforms and scale this up. Here she comes. Ta-da. So I like my boat further back. Or I'm sorry, I like my couch further back. So we'll do that. Yeah. I think that looks comfy.
I would say so.
Thank you. Thank you for indulging this. So I'm gonna go ahead and collapse down my stack, and I'm going to once again like move the couch into the hierarchy next to the boat, but now I'm gonna get rid of this boat entirely. So I just have my couch. And then again, I just need to go back into my set and add the couch to this export set. And then go ahead and bring this into Unity. Ta-da! I think this is an improvement.
Big reveal.
Cool. So, you know, it's cool. And I think people would be super envious of my couch boat, but it looks kind of plain. And I just need some upholstery on my couch. So I just so happen to have some materials that I had output from the ottoman in my living room. And if you recall, I had already generated these as an example in ArtEngine. And if I go back to my hierarchy, I had set the output node on that graph to my Unity project, and it had output this albedo, normal, and a roughness texture. So I want to go ahead and now apply this to my couch. And I can do so by creating just a simple material inside of the universal render pipeline. And that will assign a standard shader that the render pipeline will use. But, you know, we'll take a look at what I get when I use just the standard shader. So I have the ability to have a base map, a smoothness map, and tiling, but not much else. So in case I want to do some fancy effects with my shader, that's something that's not available in the standard lit. So I want to be able to add onto that in a custom shader graph. And this is a tool that is new to our scriptable render pipelines that is really cool for artist workflows because you don't have to write a single line of shader code. And the way that you can create a shader graph in Unity is to go to our create menu and look at our shader sets here. So here are where our graphs are. And I'm going to choose a PBR graph. Okay, and that's it. So that'll create a new shader graph. I just want to skip to one that I've already sort of prepped a little bit for a couch, because if you open up a brand new shader graph, you'll see that all you have is what's called a master node. So this is going to contain all of the code encapsulated for our lighting solution in this particular render pipeline, and not much else. So you do have to do a little bit of a setup to be able to connect your maps to this. So I've done that a little bit. We'll do this one. Yeah, here we go. So I've set that up a little bit so you can see what it'll look like. I have two sample textures from coming off of parameters. So in order to expose settings within the shader, we have something called a blackboard, and it's activated by these options or these toggles here in the top right. So you'll see that there's already a blackboard value, a parameter that's exposed to allow us to insert a normal map, albedo, something called ninja skills, which we will get to. I'll save that for later. And then I also wanted the ability to change the normal strength as well as adjust the tiling because I have created a tileable texture, so I want to take advantage of that. And just to save myself some time, I know I'm going to need tiling, so I'm going to pull down from my blackboard these properties and drag them into my shader graph. So I'm just clicking and dragging into the graph area. And basically, this is a reference or a pointer to these parameters that are going to be exposed in the material. Okay, so I'm going to set this over here and just sort of get them prepared. So the first thing I just want to set up is the tiling, because I know since it's a tileable texture, I definitely want to control that. And if I hit spacebar, just like in ArtEngine, I can bring up the node libraries in Shader Graph. And we just so happen to have a node called tiling and offset. So if I select that, you'll see that it brings up our tiling and offset node. And I'm just going to input the Blackboard value that I created into my tiling. And this is actually, just a vector, a single dimensional vector that I can use to control how much tiling is going to happen. Oh, I'm sorry, it's a two-dimensional vector for the U and the V. And then I'm going to output this into the UV of my albedo and the UV of my normal. And you can see that the default values from the Blackboard are now feeding into the graph. And you can see there's a preview not only on the nodes themselves, but a main preview here at the bottom right. And if I go to my tiling setting, you can see that it's set to 3, but I can bump that up to like 10 or bump that down to say like 1. Okay. The next thing that I want to hook up is my normal strength, just because I want my artists to have the ability to adjust how strong that normal is, and do that per object, per material. So also conveniently, we have a normal strength node, and I can go ahead and pipe this into my strength input. And then instead of feeding the normal directly into the normal map slot in my master node, I'm going to feed it into this normal strength node and then feed the output into my normal map instead. So this will give me the ability to sort of filter out how strong I want this to be before I feed it into the main master node. And let's go ahead and save this. And just go back to my couch and just take a look at what we've got so far. So I need to make a new material that now uses this shader, and I just so happen to have one available.
How lucky.
How lucky. Yes. So I'm going to drop and drag this over to my couch, and I'm just going to make sure that it's using the couch material that I created. And there we go. And if I open up the material settings, you'll see that all of the Blackboard values that I had inside of the shader graph are now exposed in the material settings. So ninja skills, my normal strength, my tiling, you can see that that's all hooked up and working just how I want. Okay, and you can, it might be hard to see in the capture, but you can see like the normals also kind of shifting. Okay, but now I want to do something that's appropriate for a racing game, a boat attack game, or in this case, a boat couch attack game. So I want to be able to do things like a sneak attack, because what's the best way to take advantage of somebody else than to be in stealth mode and do a quick sneak attack from your couch? No one would expect that. Or at least I wouldn't expect that. So what I want to do is go back into my shader and actually hook up something to my alpha map in order to affect the opacity, the transparency of my texture. So I have my alpha clip threshold and my alpha, and those are two things that I can play with inside of here to affect kind of, well, first, I can attach an alpha setting to this guy. You know what, let me, instead of just kind of messing around or trying to create a map, actually let me create something that's a procedural node that we have available in Shader Graph. So we have a noise, and it's just a simple sort of like procedurally generated noise map, and I can adjust kind of like the cell size in here. And instead of coming up with an alpha map for this, let's actually just attach that to our alpha here. And you can see that affect the couch as I'm playing with the clip threshold. So I'm already kind of seeing like a cool way to have my couch materialize and dematerialize when I go into my theoretical stealth mode. So I just need a way to control this clip threshold. And right now, you know, I can do it inside the shader, but I want to be able to have either my artist play around with this or have this hooked up to some type of, you know, logic, game logic, that doesn't need to go inside of the shader graph to do it. And that is exactly what our Ninja Skills Blackboard parameter is going to help us do. So like I said, we're going to save this for later. So I dragged it into my shader graph over here. And instead of just manually, you know, sliding this up and down, we can control it through this input that's now exposed in the material. And if I go ahead and save this and go back to our scene and then play with this value here, you can see that now I have the makings of maybe a cool stealth mechanic that we can hook up, stealth couch that we can hook up into. Oh, wait, I'll never forget this demo.
That's right. Stubbing your toe is guaranteed. Stealth couch.
So I can now have this available to my to the game logic, and hook this up to some type of like game mechanic that involves sneaking up on your enemies.
Stealth couch.
Yes. Okay, so at this point, I feel like there's a lot of stuff that we've covered, and I'm going to actually pass it off to Mike, and he's going to cover, I think, the cooler stuff, actually.
Oh, I wouldn't say that, but I'm going to cover some other stuff for sure. Let's see here. So I'm going to take over from you. There we go. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, I can.
All right. In a world where stealth couches roam the seas and humanity's extinct creature, stealth couch. All right. So, and real quick, actually, before I start, do you have a dog or a cat?
I used to.
Okay. Or maybe that's just the fiber of the couch.
Oh, yeah. That's.
I was just amusing myself with it. Do you take that with your cell phone?
I did.
Nice. Look at that. That's just so cool. All right. Anyway, I'm getting derailed, but I was like, let's inspect your couch.
I was going to say I did have a friend bring a giant pit bull over, and it did maul the couch a little bit. So. Well,
that'll happen. So, all right. So we have this couch. And I'm actually going to enter play mode, and we can actually see the couch, you know, being a couch as it do. And one thing that's actually already set up in here is some controls. So we can actually sail this couch, right? And this was actually already in there. Those were the scripts and things that we had seen. But obviously we have an issue where the couch is able to leave the camera. And so that makes it a fairly non-playable experience. So I'd like to set up a camera system. And, you know, writing smart camera systems is actually quite challenging. Actually, are you guys able to see my screen? It looks like it didn't really update in my preview. Did you see me sailing around? Or?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. Okay, so my preview window shows it static. So I was like, oh no, it's not wrong. Right. All right. So So yeah, so the code to actually write really robust smart camera systems are very intense, right? The AI for smart camera controls are really intense. I don't want to do any of that, so I'm going to utilize something called Cinemachine, which is installed through the package manager as we saw previously. And when we do that, it adds this menu at the top, Cinemachine, and I could just go ahead and click Create Virtual Camera. And what the virtual camera is going to do is on my main camera, it's going to add a Cinemachine brain component. And then the virtual cameras can all share this one camera. So you don't need like 10 cameras in your scene or whatever. All these virtual cameras can sort of share. And so I'm going to look at my game view right now. And I have this virtual camera selected. And it needs to know, okay, what is my camera going to follow? What is my camera going to look at? And so I'm just going to drag this boat couch over here. So we're going to follow the boat couch. And so my camera is going to adjust over here. We're also going to say, look at the boat couch, because we could maybe look at the rocks while following the boat or the couch or something like that, or vice versa. So, we want to follow closely behind. So here we go. Now, obviously, I'm, kind of set in a weird position there. So I'm just going to kind of look down here. First off, my far clipping plane. Let's go ahead and just fix that. That's just sort of default virtual camera there. And I'm going to say, all right, so I want to be above the couch. All right, so I'm just adjusting my follow offset here. So something maybe like that. And I'm obviously going to be a lot closer. So we'll go something like there. There we go. And maybe that feels all right. And so the next things we have here are damping, right? So the one reason I couldn't actually just take my camera and just drag it as a child onto the couch itself for this boat is because without any inertia, right, following the couch like perfectly will make you like really motion sick, because people expect inertia. They expect inertial forces. I mean, that's how we experience things in real life. That's for all cinema, movies, TV, anything filmed with an actual physical camera. You have to have these things. You have to have inertia. You have to have these sort of damping forces. And so we have some set for XYZ. I'm also going to add some yaw damping, which is my turning. All right, so some damping on my turning. Again, it won't be a perfect turn. The boat's going to turn, and then the camera's going to turn, right? So there's some inertia there. I also, for my aim, I'm going to look a little bit above the boat, and I'm also going to look a little ahead of the boat, which is going to make it feel like I'm going faster. Right? That's just a little trick there. And I don't really need to mess with the rest of the stuff. I could do all sorts of stuff like compose like 2/3 and whatever, or do group shots or crane shots or whatever. But I'm just going to sort of leave this as is, just real quickly set up here. You can also do things like noise and stuff like that. But let's see what happens with just that little bit of work on this, feature this built in or just add to a package. And so now you'll notice how my boat turns or my couch turns and then the camera turns. That's that damping force, right? So it makes it feel really good. There's those inertial forces. And then the boat takes off and the boat stops and the camera lags just a little bit behind, just enough to feel like a physical camera, right? Because this game is about realism. Realism is very important in Couch Surfer. And so exactly. So we have to have a really solid camera system there. Now that I have the camera system set up, what that does allow me to do is allows me to explore the island. And there's one area you can't actually get to when you're playing the game, like as the actual demo of the game, but you can get to while we're doing this part. And that's right over here in these caves. And so I'm going to head on over to these caves. And while I'm in the caves, I don't really like the sort of the look and feel, right? When I'm outside, we're using these post-processing volumes to add like bloom and brightness and color and all these things. And the same profile is being applied while I'm in the cave. And it doesn't quite feel right? So I want to make some improvements here. So I'm going to leave play mode. And I am going to head over to this cave right over here. And I have just a game object already set up for this. And I'm going to add something to this. I'm going to add something called a volume component. And this volume component is where I'm going to set up a lot of my graphical effects, like my URP volume stuff, my HDRP volume stuff, but also my post-processing. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to a priority higher than 0. So I'm going to set it to 1 because we already have a global one, which is all the bloom and everything and the lighting, all that out here. And I'm going to say that, okay, inside my cave here, I want this volume to have a higher priority. And then I'm just going to go ahead and create a new profile for it. And on this profile, I can just start adding all sorts of effects. So I could go to post-processing. One I like to do is color adjustments. So I'm going to override post exposure. The reason I turn that on, it gets brighter, is because there's already some post exposure out here that makes it a little darker. And so I'm just going to turn this down maybe just a little bit more, a little darker, because I want it to kind of glow. I'll show you that in a second here. And since we're inside, I'm going to go to my saturation. We're going to desaturate a little bit. So like that. Contrast, I might even just drop my contrast a tiny bit. Just like that, right? So it's kind of looking a little, pale and kind of flat and whatever, So I'm going to add some more effects here in a moment. Next thing I can do is I could do something like a vignette, vignette suite. Like I could go like crazy with a vignette, but could add just a touch of it, right? Just some darkening around the corners there. Makes it feel like the shadow's really kind of there. And then everyone's favorite, bloom. I love bloom. So I like to just kind of drop my threshold down and go high with my intensity, because inside this cave, light's gonna be bouncing around all over the place, that water and everything, and off the wet walls and whatnot. So, and of course it's bloom, right? So we can be like AAA game. The more bloom you have, the more AAA it is. That's a rule.
Or
actually,
Instagram filter.
there you go. I think the Supreme Court upheld that the more bloom you have, the more AAA it is. And so there we go. So we're gonna have it, give it this little bit of a glow there. I think I desaturated a little too much for my taste. There we go. And there's a lot of stuff we can do too. So like we could do chromatic aberration is always fun. It makes no sense for this effect, but it's always just really fun. Like very bloomy out there, where it does that edge banding and stuff like that, and just a lot of cool stuff. Panini projections for anyone who's hungry. But one thing I like to do here for bloom, especially when we're kind of in an area like this where we're gonna have like very sort of bright bouncing light against what would be our camera lens, is I like to use lens dirt. Right, so it really makes some of those effects pop out. So there's usually a lens dirt that I like to use, dirt texture, but just for the sake of funsies, since we're keeping a theme, I'm going to use the couch texture, and we're going to have a plaid lens dirt. I really like that there. So we could say, okay, we have a plaid texture on the lens, and the light's bouncing off it. Obviously, that looks a little ridiculous, so I'm going to turn that off, and I'm actually going to use my lens dirt, but I can use kind of any texture I want. So I have this lens dirt here, and I'm going to increase the intensity, and what it's going to do is we're just going to see all those little water droplets and stuff on the lens of my quote-unquote camera, right, while I'm in here. And that's looking pretty cool. That's maybe that's a bit intense there, but that's really the effect I want inside this cave, right? Something like this. Now the problem I have is, while it looks great in the cave, not so great outside anymore. Right? Because what I've done is I've created this global volume with a higher priority than my other global volume, and I set all these crazy settings. And so what I need to do is I need to tell this volume that it is not global, it's local, right? Then it's going to be based off of the collider that's around it, right? So this cave has a collider on it, and so now I'm going to set up a blend distance. I believe I've turned off the gizmos, which is why we can't see it. But I assure you it's there. So I'm going to give this some blend distance so that it doesn't just snap on and snap off. It blends over a distance. So there we go. So it's now a local volume with some distance there, and just sort of hidden the gizmo. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit play. And so we're going to have our normal post-processing while I'm cruising around. And then I'm going to come into my cave, and there we go. And so now I'm in my cave volume here. And then, it's bright outside, whatever. And then we come outside, and it blends back to my outside volume, right? So I'm able to really add some cool effects to the various areas in some real sort of...
The physics on that couch is amazing.
Well, do a barrel roll, right? I think we actually made it so you can't tip the boats anymore, which means you can't tip the couch. But there you go. Now, one last thing I want to show you here is that I am an artist, so I went ahead and added a pirate ship. So this is my opportunity to contribute something artsy to our project. So we wanted to add some pirates. We want to have some gameplay mechanic there by which we can shoot at these pirates. And so we want some guns to appear, and then we want to be able to shoot these pirates. And we're going to use Timeline. Thank you, David. That is a AAA pirate ship. So we are going to use Timeline to basically not only animate and sequence this gun motion, but then also to trigger some code, which is a relatively new thing with signals and markers, to make it so that I'm ready to shoot these pirates. And so I'm going to come back here to my couch. And if you all recall from earlier that we have these guns right over here. So I'm just going to go ahead and see, there they are. I'm going to go ahead and just drag these onto my boat couch, onto the root hull right there. And I'll set that to 0, 0. And so we have these guns just chilling underneath the couch, very inconspicuous. And now what I'm going to do is I am going to go ahead and create a new timeline that I'm going to use to animate this stuff. So I'm going to go to my project window. I'm going to right click, create, and timeline. And I love the name new timeline. I feel it's very descriptive, so I'm going to leave that. And I'm just going to drop this new timeline on my guns. And that's going to have a playable director. I'm going to say do not play on awake because it shouldn't play this animation when we start. It should only play these animations when it's time to arm the cannons, so to speak. And so now I'm going to go to my timeline window, and I'm going to select this new timeline, and I'll just lock that right there. And so now I can begin sequencing pretty much whatever I want, right? That's one of the cool things here is anything you can animate, you can automate, you can sequence, you can do whatever. So I'm going to drag this left gun down to my timeline window, and it's going to say, all right, what kind of track are you trying to do? I'm going to do an animation track. I'm going to do the same for the right gun. There we go, also an animation track. And so now for the left gun, I could try to do some keyframe animation and stuff like that and open up the animation window and whatnot. But what I can do is I can actually just go into record mode. Now in record mode, whatever I do to this game object, this left gun game object, is being recorded as keyframes. And so what I can do is I can actually just right click rotation and click add key because I want 0, 0, 0 to be the starting rotation. And then I could drag this to say like 60 seconds or 60 frames, so 1 second. And I can say, all right, well, let's arm these guns, something like that. There we go. And so now I can leave record mode and we have this motion, right? And that's part of our timeline. Now I'm going to do the same for the right gun. And so again, I'm going to just add a key there at the 0 frame, and I'm going to go to 60, and I'm just going to rotate this. There we go, something along those lines. And so cool. So now we have our couch is armed. You came to the wrong neighborhood. And so now, once the guns are in position, that's when I can fire. So I don't want to be able to shoot during this part, right? Because the guns aren't out yet. So I need a way to say, okay, now it's time. And now it's time to arm the gun, so to speak. I could write code to do this. I could write code that says, wait 1 second and then do this. But what if I change the animation? What if I change the sequence? Then I have to go in and change the code, and there's maintenance issues there. And so I'm going to use timeline to just do this for me. So I'm going to click where there's this little push pin or the markers section, and I'm just going to move this over here, and I am going to add a signal emitter. All right, and so it's going to say, all right, okay, when I hit this frame, we're going to emit some signal. And so first off, I'm going to click add signal receiver that says, okay, the guns are going to add or receive a signal. I can also put this on other game objects and stuff to sync a bunch of things, but in this case I just need the guns to receive a signal. And on for emit signal, I have a couple that already exist in here, but I'm just going to create a new one, and it's going to say, all right, what do you want to name this signal? I think new signal is a fantastic name, so I'm just going to save that in my folder there. So it's going to emit a signal, and I could have a series of receivers, but in this case I only have one. So it's going to talk to this guns game object. And on the guns game object, there is a script called the gun controller, and I'm just going to say, hey, gun controller, the guns are ready. So now when this marker is hit, it's going to say, hey, gun controller, it is time. The guns are now ready to roll. And there is a script on here already called the gun controller, like I said, that says when I press the tab key, we're going to play the director that's on here. And so let's see what happens. So I'm going to hit play, and I have my boat, and when I press the tab key, guns are armed. All right, now let's go get some pirates. I also cheated a little bit. I added a script to my couch that allows me to press a key to go stealth mode. All right, so we're all about cheating, and then we can just be like, take that, you filthy pirates, and win. And so there we go. Hooray! The world has been saved thanks to friendship and the power of art tools and sweet couches. And yeah, so there we go. So that's mostly what I wanted to talk about tonight. Just talking about Cinemachine, post-processing, obviously upholstery, and timeline. And so cool. At this point, what questions does anyone have? Also, thanks for listening.
It's been very quiet in the chat aside from compliments.
Yeah, the compliments are great. The thing that, again, not being an artist, I mean, everyone knows my background is business, but the thing that impressed me most about this is that the hierarchies seem logical.
Yeah.
That you're moving from one thing to another thing as you would, in development.
So one question there was about the gun controller script, what fires off the timeline. So when we init the guns, we get the playable director. We make sure to like stop it and set the time to 0. And then when we're deploying the guns, we just say gun director.play. Do the question in chat there.
So Dustin, I'm assuming that the tribbles will henceforth be armed with cannon.
It'd be offensive if they weren't.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
And Dustin also mentioned that it's very animator-like, and yeah, a lot of the API is the same, right? And so you'll find a lot of this stuff familiar.
Other questions, guys?
Can you show that one global class you had that did all the bloom?
Oh, the global post-processing profile?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure can. So we set it up in the cave area there, and let's see, do I have it set up? I do have it set up. Hopefully that works for you guys, where I can zoom there.
Yep.
So that's the bloom.
I know. Sorry, the whole does that volume class just include like every I guess like lights?
So basically, the volume is a component that accepts a profile, which is basically a scriptable object. And those profiles can, if I click Add Override, can have a whole bunch of stuff. Now, right in this case, it's only post-processing stuff, but there are tons of other things. If you're using, I think the updated URP or HDRP, there are other things in here besides just post-processing. But in this case, we've got white balancing, tone mapping, split toning, if everyone loves Instagram, and a bunch of these other things. So there's a lot we can do with this.
Okay, thanks.
I got like lift, gamma, and gain. Let's do, all right, shadows and highlights. Oh, right, this is still set up to be, let's back to global. Yeah, I should have seen that coming. All right, and then you can do just color adjustments to do different tones and whatnot. So it's a lot of neat stuff you can do there. Looks so good.
Every racing game should come complete with a couch skin.
Agreed. They wanted couch co-op. They weren't specific. So there's a question there: is it an asset store tool or is it on Asset Store 2 or just GitHub? Is what on Asset Store or GitHub? Boat Attack. Boat Attack is, assuming that's what you're talking about, is on GitHub. It is not on the Asset Store, correct, Andrea? I don't remember.
No, it's not that I know of. I haven't found it on the Asset Store. They may have like taken out some of the like models or some of the textures and put it into a package, but not like the entire project.
Fair enough. The pirate ship is not on the Asset Store, but I tell you what, if you message me on Twitter, you can have it for free. I'm willing to do that for you. So
that's a deliberate art style that I think you should market.
Oh yeah, minimalism, right? And kindergartenism. I like that. Look at that. Two-sided. You don't get that anywhere else.
Oh yeah, that's advanced.
I drew both sides. You know how hard it was to get this side to line up with this side? It took just hours.
That's right, Paper Mario. That's
And
that's
it's actually
perfect for
a
Nintendo.
giant collider on it too. There we go.
You are going to hit that pirate ship no matter what.
Well, that's right. Well, I found out I kept missing it, so I'm like, all right, well, screw it. I don't need realism at this point. It's a giant collider. Anything else? Any other questions or anything anyone wants to see? Oh, you know what? Actually, while I have your rapt attention, I do want to show you this because I did open this up. So, because we were talking about just some of the wild stuff you can do with ArtEngine, where we had this wood pattern that was actually generated from a bunch of source assets. So, like, it was originally a photograph of a wooden fence that, through all of these nodes, we turned into a floor, such as this. But what I was joking about is, so I have up here both Frodo and Louise Scully, who's actually the marketing person in charge of ArtEngine. And if I drag Frodo on here to this color match node, now what we can actually see is that the color matches very much a pressure treated pine. So there you go. If there's anyone that's ever seen wet pressure treated pine, it looks pretty much exactly like that. And then if anyone wanted to ever see a bleached sandalwood, she has the correct profile image for that. And so there you go, bleached sandalwood. Or you can do some of these other ones where maybe it's this node down here. It's just really neat what you can do, like just color variations and style variations and mutations and stuff like that, to make something out of something else. So it's pretty cool stuff.
Are there any other questions coming up from the group? I do know that it is getting late for everybody. I know we've had people join in from basically all over. So I'd like to thank you guys very much. I will let you know in the next couple of days when the video goes up on YouTube, and I'll be providing a link to that over to the team over at Unity. And again, please stay tuned for all further presentations from our IGDA branch.
Thanks, everyone.
Awesome.
Mike,
Thanks,
Andrea, thank you guys so much for your time and for all the prep work that went into this. And Andrea, in particular, I would like to thank you for your ottoman.
Ah, yes, the star of the show.
That's right.
Would not have been the same without you guys. So, again, thank you so much, and we'll look forward to following up with you.
Awesome. Thanks,
Yeah.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.